Vanessa, a nurse, faced ridicule for her weight and appearance. Her boss, who also looked down on her, demoted her to a cleaning position. However, years later, fortune smiled upon Vanessa, and her former boss came to regret his past actions. As Vanessa sat in the lobby, patiently waiting for her turn for an interview, she couldn't help but notice the degrading stares from passersby. One nurse walked by, laughed, and muttered, "How will you get a job if you're this fat?" Although those words stung, Vanessa refused to let them affect her. She knew she could cry when she got home, but not now. She could be called in at any moment. This was the 6th interview Vanessa had attended that week. Since completing her nursing diploma, she had struggled to find a job. During interviews, she was often told she was too overweight to be a nurse, as they believed her size would hinder her ability to perform the demanding tasks required. Despite this, Vanessa remained resilient and never lost hope. Here she was again on Thursday morning, having arrived at the lobby by 8 a.m. for a 10 a.m. interview. Now it was 3 p.m., and no one had called her in. To make matters worse, everyone who had arrived after her had already been seen. Just when Vanessa was beginning to contemplate whether or not to leave, the office assistant came out to tell her it was her turn to be interviewed. Vanessa walked confidently into the HR office and answered the interview questions brilliantly. Unfortunately, she received the same response. "I'm sorry, but we think you're not a perfect match. Maybe you could try again when you lose some weight." Vanessa's face immediately went white with fear. Without thinking, she fell to her knees and desperately begged to be given the job. "I'm sorry, you seem qualified, but we can't deal with fat nurses at the moment," the HR representative said, showing her the door. Feeling defeated and hurt, Vanessa walked out of the office and went to the parking lot. When she got there, she crouched beside a car and cried her eyes out. "Why won't anyone take a chance on me? Why is life so cruel?" Just then, the car's door made a clicking sound, and a man named George, who was in his late 30s, came out of the car. Vanessa didn't know someone had been in the car the whole time, so she felt embarrassed that he had watched her cry, and she quickly wiped her face. "I'm sorry, I didn't know someone was in the car," she apologized, but the man didn't mind. He was more interested in the reason behind her tears. You see, this man, although young, was the managing director of the hospital, and Vanessa couldn't even remember the last time anyone had shown an interest in her well-being. So now that the gentleman seemed interested in knowing more about her frustrations, she poured out her heart to him. When she was done explaining, George asked her to show him her credentials, and she did. Seeing that she was qualified, he asked her to come with him to the HR office. When they got there, he reprimanded the HR representative and asked Vanessa to start working the following week. Vanessa was overjoyed. She was so glad that someone finally took a chance on her. Filled with joy, Vanessa mindlessly hugged the managing director, thanked him, and ran out of the office, grinning like a happy child who had just been given a popsicle. Little did she know her life would soon turn into a living hell. Although work was hectic, Vanessa, who worked in the accident and emergency section, gave it her best shot and never once complained. She was down to earth and went out of her way to help her patients. All the patients loved her because she took good care of them. Unfortunately, the head of the department, Thomas, seized every opportunity to pick on Vanessa. Despite her diligence, he disliked her because she was overweight. She shamed her in the presence of her colleagues and called her fat and ugly. He found faults with everything she did and tried his best to make her look incompetent. For a brief period, Vanessa succeeded in overlooking the way Thomas treated her, but later it started getting to her. She especially hated the times when he mocked her in front of her colleagues. To make matters worse, the other nurses would also laugh at his bitter jokes. Soon enough, Vanessa fell into depression. Whenever she arrived at the hospital, her heart would start beating so fast. How long would she be able to keep living like this? Vanessa made sure she didn't get into trouble with Thomas, but unfortunately, one morning, the moment she dreaded finally came. Vanessa made a mistake at work, even though it was a mild one. Thomas seized the opportunity to hurt her, demoting her to a cleaner. Whenever Vanessa's colleagues saw her cleaning, they mocked her and threw dirt in the places she had already swept. Their actions crushed Vanessa, but she didn't call it quits. Vanessa vowed to endure everything that was put in front of her, hoping that someday Thomas would forgive her and reinstate her. But what would happen next would change her life forever. 2 weeks later, a homeless man rushed a girl, about the age of 18, to the hospital. Her knee was fractured, and she had bruises all over her body, but something devastating happened. Thomas refused to attend to the young woman and shouted at the homeless man to take away the young woman, whom he deemed a beggar. "This is not some charity organization. We don't take care of beggars and homeless people. Get lost before I call the cops," Thomas screamed. When everyone left, Vanessa, who had been watching the whole incident, couldn't stand Thomas's uncompassionate act towards the young woman. She could tell that the teenager was in a lot of pain, so she decided to step in. Making sure that no one was watching, Vanessa walked up to the homeless man and offered to help. She snuck the young woman into her locker room and treated her there. The young woman had been robbed while returning late at night from a friend's birthday party. The man stole her car, injured her, and dumped her by the roadside. Thankfully, the homeless man found her and rushed her to the hospital. 3 days later, the young woman, who was still recovering in an examination room, asked for her phone, which she used to call her elder brother, who surprisingly turned out to be George, the managing director of the hospital. Finally, it was time for Thomas to pay the price for his evil and dirty deeds. You see, many staff members and patients had lodged complaints against Thomas. George even learned that he took bribes from patients and created fake medical results in return for money. Finally, seeing the way he treated his sister just because he thought she was a beggar, George fired Thomas. After this incident, George and Vanessa got closer, and in no time, they fell in love with each other and began dating. George eventually confessed to Vanessa that he had always had a thing for her ever since the moment he saw her crying in the car park and when she hugged him in the HR office. However, he told her he couldn't approach her because he felt that she was not in the right state of mind for a relationship, and he didn't want it to seem like he was taking advantage of her because he had given her the job, even though she earned it on merit. After dating for a year, George and Vanessa got married. 10 years later, Vanessa and George, still happily married, had 2 kids. Here comes the most beautiful part. With her husband's support, Vanessa successfully embarked on a weight loss journey. But that's not all. George also opened a private hospital, and Vanessa started working there as a human resources manager. One day, Vanessa received an unexpected visitor. It was Thomas, there to interview for the position of junior doctor. After he finished answering the interview questions, Vanessa expressed her surprise that he didn't recognize her. She then pulled out a picture of herself from her heavier days and showed it to him. "Do you remember me now? I'm sure you recall this girl you called ugly and demoted to a cleaner." Overcome with shame, Thomas fell to his knees, regretting his past actions. He offered an apology. Since George had fired him, Thomas had struggled to find work. News of his unethical behavior had spread, leaving him unwelcome at any hospital. Vanessa, however, did not offer him a job. "We only hire hardworking and compassionate doctors. I'm sorry, but I don't believe you fit what we're looking for," she said with a faint smile. Realizing he was the architect of his own downfall, Thomas bowed his head in shame and left the office. It serves as a reminder to always be kind and humble, as you never know what the future may hold. What do you think of this story? Let us know in the comments. Thank you.